Factitious disorder imposed on another has been known for its entire existence as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. You might be familiar with the term Munchausen's, but it's no longer recognized as that. It is now identified as FDIA, or factitious disorder imposed on another. If you haven't noticed, that is a mouthful, so I will be calling it FDIA. So before we go into FDIA, though, let's first discuss malingering. So malingering is a term you may hear in some shows like Law and Order or the like, but malingering is similar to factitious disorder, but it's distinct from its motivation. Okay, when somebody's malingering, they are purposefully, knowingly feigning illness or injury for some sort of tangible gain, whether that is money or access or some sort of measurable, tangible gain. Okay, so a great example of this would be, say, somebody that slips and falls at a restaurant on purpose and gets injured in order to get a check. Or let's say somebody is walking through a hotel lobby and purposely falls and does so in order to get a free night stay at the hotel. All of this is malingering. So that little comic on the left is an excellent way, excellently captures kind of this idea of what malingering is. But moving into factitious disorder, okay, so as I mentioned, this lesson is going to be about FDIA imposed on another, but first let's discuss just factitious disorder in general, okay? So this is a mental disorder in which a person feigns illness, but unlike malingering, the purpose here is for interpersonal benefits, okay? And we'll go into what that means more. This person has knowingly or otherwise created the symptoms in which they are seeing or showing. So the interpersonal benefits we're talking about here is attention or, donations or, people coming over and showing empathy, any sort of thing that kind of gives them what is a sense of social stature, if you will. Okay, this is often indicative of psychopathy because remember, psychopathy, although often is involved in, serial killers, psychopathy simply means a lack of empathy, an inability to feel how others feel. So if somebody's pretending to be sick to gain people's empathy, that is usually indicative of the fact that they cannot feel empathy for the pain that they are causing that person. And they will keep this a secret. And sometimes they'll do it, they'll be completely lying. The symptoms they'll be showing, they're not actually showing, right? They're quote unquote showing them. They are making them up. They're lying and saying they experience them. Other times they'll be taking medications or putting other things into their system in order to actually display those symptoms. So in order to diagnose factitious disorder, there are three things that need to be present. Okay, there has to be intentional showing of symptoms. Okay, and those could be psychological or physical, but they just can't be showing those symptoms without trying to, right? It has to be very much on purpose. The next one is that they have a motivation to kind of take on this sick role for that attention. The third one is they don't have any sort of external incentive. So remember, think about malingering. Malingering, they have the motivation to have the attention from others, right? So they want to gain the check or the free hotel room. Those are external incentives. But if we're talking about internal incentives or interpersonal benefits, now we're talking about factitious disorder. So when we talk about factitious disorder imposed on another, what we're discussing is factitious disorder, that is putting on symptoms that you're ill, but doing it to another person. Okay, so the people that we typically see become the victims of FDIA are children, elderly persons, those with a disability, or even pets. So if you see this little comic on the left here, right, this can I get my milk from an unopened container? And so Munchausen syndrome by proxy is the same thing as FDIA. Munchausen syndrome is the same thing as factitious disorder. A person that is showing and acting, a person with FDIA has a history of abuse or trauma. They likely have high levels of family dysfunction. Maybe they're socially isolated. They may have high levels of mental health illness, or sometimes they even have professional healthcare experience. And the reason why that comes into play is because if they have that healthcare experience, then they know how to make those symptoms. They know what the symptoms they should be showing, right? If you and I were to say, I don't know, try to fake that we had some sort of cancer, I wouldn't even know where to begin in terms of appearing as though I have it. But if I had a healthcare background, then I would know exactly what symptoms I should be showing, in what order, and how much I should be showing them to be consistent with my illness. Okay, so FDIA is very interesting. It pops up in a lot of shows. There's a few episodes on it on Law and Order SVU, but really it is considered a form of child abuse, because remember that they are making their child ill on purpose. Okay, and just one more thing I want to touch on before moving on here is that not only are they making their child ill on purpose, but they're doing it for their own selfish benefits. So remember, child maltreatment is causing harm to your child. And if you are making them ill for whatever reason, then that is most certainly constitutes child maltreatment. And it's important to note here that sometimes people with FDIA really truly believe it. So although we all may realize that they are just faking it or that it's made up, it becomes pathological to them. And they truly believe in their mind that they are ill or the person they're making ill is ill. Not always, but it oftentimes that is the case. So why on earth would anybody abuse a child? If you've been watching the trials of Gabriel Fernandez that's been on Netflix, they've really kind of gotten into this. How could somebody do this? If you haven't, I recommend it. It is difficult to watch, so do so with some caution, but it really does an excellent job of capturing a lot of what this whole module has been about, this idea of child maltreatment. But so why does it happen? Well, there's typically, if you look at a parent-child relationship, we can identify certain qualities about that relationship that may be indicative of child maltreatment occurring. The first being inappropriate parental expectations of the child. So they may be expecting that their 1.5-year-old can use the toilet all on their own, when we all know that a 1.5-year-old is incapable of that. They're not cognitively or physically developed to a point that they're capable to do that. Or perhaps they want their, first grader to be reading at a high school level. Well, that's just beyond what's realistic. And so because they have these expectations, they're setting themselves up to be let down by that child at every turn. And the more let down they are by the child, the more frustrated they may become. Another abnormality in that relationship is this lack of empathy. So if they cannot understand that a child needs certain things, then they will struggle with that. There's a great Cat Williams stand-up bit where he talks about seeing people yell at their kids in the grocery stores about their kids wanting Skittles. And he says the line like, your kid's supposed to like Skittles. It's a kid, right? And that's the idea, right? A child's going to like candy, okay? Your job is to be like, no, that's not good for your teeth or your diet or whatever it might be. But you have to understand that, yes, a child's going to want and need certain things that, you're going to have to regulate. Another thing would be, a child that, they have a strong need to fit in. Kids very much have that need. It is not just a want, it's a need. Standing out for a child can be really traumatic. So a kid may want a certain name brand pair of pants, right? I remember in middle school, it was right when Abercrombie and Fitch became popular. Yes, that's not even my age, but Abercrombie and Fitch just started up. And I wanted a pair of Abercrombie & Fitch pants so bad. And my mom, she was, of course, as nice as could be, took me to go try on Abercrombie pants. She then convinced me to go back to Target to buy like 80 other things instead because she's a smart woman. But she at least could understand why I wanted this thing, despite the fact that at the time, I didn't need a new pair of jeans. I especially didn't need a $100 pair of jeans, right? But because she was patient and she had empathy for that, we were able to work through it. Now, a parent that couldn't understand that or couldn't sympathize or empathize with their child may respond differently. Another sign that may lead to maltreatment is a parent's belief in physical punishment. Now, I want to be really clear here. Just because a parent spanks their child or believes that it is okay to spank their child does not mean they will abuse their kid, okay? Be very clear about that. Just because a parent physically punishes their child does not mean they're abusing their child. This is a whole nother discussion that is much better to have in class because it's interesting to see how do we draw that line? At what point is that physical punishment become abuse? Some say it's when they leave a mark, or some say when it's drawing blood, or some people say when it's when it goes above and beyond serving its purpose. But wherever that line is, right, it becomes quite blurry. If you have a parent that never spanked you and never would lay a hand on you, the likelihood of them actually physically abusing you are much lower, right? Because it's just like that line between abuse and abuse and physical punishment is blurry, it can also become that way in practice. Okay, now that's not to say anything about neglect or emotional abuse, because those things certainly can happen in the absence of physical punishment. The fourth abnormality is parental role reversal. So this is when a kid takes on the role of the parent. So I had a friend in high school whose mom was an alcoholic, and more times than I could count, I would go over to her house and we would bathe her little sisters and put them to bed and make them dinner and then get her alcoholic mom in bed and, tuck her in, and then we'd pick up the house and pack up all the kids' lunch for the next morning. My friend certainly experienced levels of emotional abuse because her mom resented her. Oh, you think you're the mom? You think you're in charge here? And, my friend was just trying to do what was right for her siblings, but it oftentimes came off as disrespectful to her mother. So that's one of the ways that it can often lead to a physical abuse, right? Or emotional abuse, is this idea of the parent feeling as though the kid is trying to take over, right? And they may resent them for that. Okay, there's also theories that are applied to explain it. And these are going to be familiar to you, so we're not going to spend too much time on them. Okay, the first is this intergenerational transmission of violence theory. We've spoken about this at length, right? This is the idea that if a child grows up in a home with violence, they're more likely to carry that violence on, okay? And to clarify, the reason why is not just because, there was violence around, so now they're violent. No, it's because that violence becomes normalized, right? To the child growing up in a home where violence is prevalent, the shock factor of violence is greatly diminished. So where you and I might be stunned to see, a mother hit their child, or maybe a child hit their sibling, right? If a kid's grown up in a house where that's all they know, then that's normal to them. They don't know other ways to interact with or show their frustration, okay, other than to rely on violence. And this is related to social learning theory because not only is it normalized, but they learn those behaviors, okay? So that's intergenerational transmission of violence. It has both the normalization of violence and the learning of violent behavior. Okay, and social learning theory is how we explain that. Right? Social learning theory argues that our behavior is learned. We are like little sponges, right? We soak in everything we see. So if we see, I have two older sisters, and I can't tell you when I would always see them singing into their brushes, along the radio. And so when I was like 2, there's pictures of me with a hairbrush singing along. I would never have known how to do that had I not watched my sisters, right? So I imitated them and I modeled my behavior after theirs. So if you as a child were physically abused, then you learn that that's how you raise a kid, and you will imitate your behaviors after that. Okay, and the final one that we're going to discuss is the ecological theory. And ecological theory should apply ecology. Ecology should make you think of more environmental, right? And so that is kind of what we're discussing here. So ecological theory of maltreatment says that there's 4 levels of factors that can affect whether or not a child is abused. So there's individual factors, which are things like, size, gender, personality, whether or not they are an only child or the youngest or the oldest, right? And then if we back up to family, now we're talking about family dynamics. Are the parents together? Are they divorced? Was it a cordial divorce? Or is it, is there a lot of animosity there? Is there sibling rivalry? Is there sibling violence to begin with? Is the parents abusive to the other children, right? And then we back up to the community, and that we're looking at things like, is violence normalized in the community? Or is it the kind of community that would look out for each other and speak out if they saw violence? Is it the kind of community that has resources available for a child that may be experiencing maltreatment? And then largely we're looking at society, right? So if you live in a society where physical abuse is commonplace or physical discipline is commonplace, then it's much more likely to kind of go unnoticed or, there's going to be a lack of intervention there, right? And so all these factors kind of taken together influence the likelihood of whether or not maltreatment will occur. So one of the things that we've talked about already was this idea of stranger danger. And, this hopefully you're seeing throughout this lesson that much of the violence that occurs against children does indeed occur by their parents, okay, or someone close to them. But it's important to discuss this idea of stranger danger, okay, because those that have been the victim of a stranger are the ones that have resulted in some powerful legislation that has impacted us and still has long-lasting influences on us today. So one of the very first missing children cases that really garnered a lot of attention was this case of Eitan Patz. So Eitan Patz disappeared in May of 1997, and nobody knew who did it for a very long time. But what was unique about his case was that his parents spent a great deal of time hunting for him. Those are his parents there in the top left corner up here. They would not rest. They made these flyers and posted them up throughout town. They were relentlessly contacting the police. They were very involved in the community, so they rallied a lot of community rapport. And so what happened in a nutshell was Eitan was 7 years old at the time, and he was walking to his school bus. And along the way, he was on his way to the bus, a stranger picked him up off the side of the road, and he was never to be seen again. And this man here, which is ironic because I'm blanking on his name, but that should tell you because we focus on the victims, right, as victimologists. I believe his name is Hernandez, but it's possible I'm getting it confused with his first name's Pedro. I know that. But it's irrelevant. It's not important. What's important is Eitan. So Eitan, how his lasting legacy was that he was the first child to be featured on a milk carton. Now, y'all are probably too young to remember these days, but for a very long time, milk cartons looked like this, and they had a picture of a missing child on there. And he was the first one, and that was largely a result of his parents' efforts. Further, President Reagan declared the day he went missing as National Missing Children's Day. And really, his abduction has been credited as kind of pushing forward the missing children movement and really began a lot of recognition of child abduction and child harm. Now, again, remember, this is a unique case in that he was a victim of a stranger, but he is not alone. This brings us to your group work that you have for the week. Okay, you are going to, whichever group you're in, you have whichever group you've been assigned to, which you can check Blackboard to confirm that these are the laws that you are in charge of reviewing. So you're going to create a wiki page on Blackboard that kind of explains the case, right? Because each of these occurred as a result of a notorious, very highly publicized child victimization case. Okay, so you're going to discuss the case, focusing on kind of what happened and why the law became to be as a result. Then you're going to briefly discuss what the law entails. So what does it require? Now, just as a side note, if you are in Group 1, Jacob Wetterling Act came first, and then Megan's Law kind of amended that. So you can just kind of hit on the high points of Jacob Wetterling Act and then focus most of your attention on Megan's Law. And what you decide to do with the case, just as long as you are really satisfying the requirements for one of them, I will be all right with that. Okay, and then the last thing you're going to talk about is describing the lasting legacy of the case. So not just this law came to be, but so for example, in Eitan's case, right, he was, his legacy was the missing children's movement and the missing children on milk cartons. All right, and if you have questions about this, as always, do not hesitate to reach out to me, okay? I look forward to seeing your projects.